again. And let's take a look at workplace interactions. So we have already done this first part where you vent to me about your worst experience. For me, honestly, my worst experience was I worked for a local nonprofit that was hemorrhaging money. And I worked there for 6 months, and the red flags or the sirens started going off about 3 weeks in, when they pulled us into a meeting and said, well, we can't pay you this week. And all my coworkers were like, oh, okay, this is fine. I'm thinking, what do you mean they can't pay us? My mortgage is due, you know. And then they cut off our health insurance. This was before Obamacare. And then like paychecks would bounce, or they'd come a week late. And in that time, the staff went from about 36 people down to 18 people in 6 months. And it was a nightmare. Then they shut off the power to one floor of the building. Then they fired the cleaning people. So the bathrooms were in rough shape. It was a mess. But workplace interactions can be scary. Why are they critical? Here's why. We spend so much time at work. We really do. If you think about it, you spend probably, and this is, to some extent, this is a criticism of American culture, but we spend so much more time at work than we do with our families, right? We really, truly do. I think about the amount of time I spend with my daughter. You know, I'll pick her up at about 4:30 every day. She's in bed by 8:30. That's about 4 hours a day, plus that hour that I'm fighting with her in the morning to get her ready for school. So 5 hours a day with my daughter versus like 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day doing work. It's huge. We spend a lot of time there. Nonverbal communication and tone are critical. Faces, noises that we make, the tones that we use are really, really critical. How do you complain to someone without sounding like you're really complaining, but still getting your point across? That's a huge part of it. Our workplace experience has an impact on our health and personal lives. You know someone right now, you know someone who has gotten physically ill because of a job. And I'm not thinking like a virus, I'm not thinking like COVID, I'm thinking like anxiety, depression, you know, a heart attack or some sort of cancer because of stress. Yep, go ahead.
She had a mental breakdown.
Absolutely.
Mental breakdown. She went into the bathroom and she locked herself in the bathroom, and she called me and her sister. And we're like, what's going on? She was in a panic mode. And it was just that one person, which was a supervisor, but which was back to the idea that I was saying, like that power trip. And like that person fed on that power trip thing to the point where it began to affect her. And that day she went into work, like before she went into the door. And I told her that at that point, she should have just walked away and not go into the workplace. Yeah. As she's walking into she was fine. As she's walking into the workplace, y'all, she started throwing up. She started feeling sick. And I'm like, the minute that happened, you should have never set foot in the place. And she was like, no, I had to work. In that mentality, you have to work, you have a family to feed. She stepped foot in the place, and she ended up, they literally had to call an ambulance. And I told her, we're on our way, but call an ambulance. Like she literally had a mental breakdown.
Yeah. And remember, again, we're emphasizing American culture and American expectations. We are brutal in this country about the expectations that we have, how much work, how little pay, how much time you're supposed to spend in the office, how important it is. We are brutal when it comes to those expectations. So of course people are going to be struggling or have problems because of it. Years ago, my first teaching job, I ended up like not in the hospital, but having all these tests done because we couldn't figure out what was wrong with my stomach. There's something wrong. There was pain. Did I have, I can't think of the words. Did I have like a cyst in my stomach? Was there something going on? It was stress. I was having a hard time with my boss and I was doing a big project. And I realize now, all these years later, that how did I not see that, as a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, that it was the job that was making me feel so miserable and so uncomfortable. And you think also about just your health and your exercise, right? When we're stressed, some of us have the tendency to overeat. Some of us have the tendency not to eat, or maybe you stop sleeping, or maybe you don't have the energy to exercise. Like all of those things you can directly connect to, you know, stress or challenges with work, and of course, health impacts. Finally, the last thing, why are workplace interactions critical? The looking glass self. And again, this is going to be American culture in particular. Because we spend so much time at work, because we put so much effort and importance on work, a lot of times we judge ourselves based on that. And so the communication that we get from coworkers, the communication that we get from supervisors becomes a reflection of ourselves. This supervisor doesn't like me. This supervisor is giving me a hard time. It's not because this person's a jerk, but what happens is people turn it internally and they think, well, it's something wrong with me. You know, this person's giving me a hard time because I'm not qualified for my job, or this person's giving me a hard time because I'm a bad employee, or because, you know, and so it becomes very, very, I don't want to say reflective, but it becomes very, very personal, essentially.
You
So
begin to see you begin to see yourself how they view you, and you whichever thing you keep thinking like, yeah, I'm not good for this. Yeah, you start downgrading yourself. Yep.
Anyone ever lose a job? Anyone ever get fired spectacularly? It's devastating. It can be absolutely devastating, whether you were let go or laid off or furloughed or fired outright. People take it personally and it becomes their self-worth. I remember losing a job years ago and essentially crying in bed for 3 days. And it wasn't my fault that I had lost the job. It was mismanagement on their part. But because I attached so much of my self-worth to it, how could I react any other way? All right. Okay. Hierarchy plays a huge role in workplace interactions. We've kind of talked about this already when we were talking about those difficult working situations. There are always going to be supervisors. There are always going to be higher ups. In the book, I know it talks about a collegial work environment versus a hierarchical work environment. But even with a collegial work environment, you're still going to find that there's some sort of hierarchy. Hopefully it's a positive hierarchy and people work collaboratively with each other. But from what we've said so far, I think it's pretty safe to say that we've all experienced the hierarchy. And that's what gets really challenging, is you have to, you know, navigate that hierarchy, who's in charge, their emotions, their personalities, their expectations. To that extent, let's think about close relationships at work. Has anyone ever been in a situation where either you are supervised by a close friend or you supervise a close friend? Has anyone ever experienced that?
Yes, I have. When I was a juvenile detention officer, and my best friend of like 17 maybe some odd years, 15 maybe odd years, and she ended up being my supervisor. And mind you, she's my children's godmother, but you know, on a job you can't let anyone know that, because that causes a lot of issues. So, you know, as quiet as kept, she had to be my supervisor. And it was fun. I'm not going to even lie to you. It was a lot of fun. And it wasn't because we were breaking rules or anything like that, because we weren't. It was because we were able to create our own rules and regulations. Like, she would create them, I would follow them, things like that. And we would come up with like master plans. So that was a good part about it.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for sharing.
The working environment was great because you guys were such good friends that it was a great working environment. I turned out a job because of that. I didn't want to take it. And the reason why I didn't want to take it was because I've known the person for so long. I've watched them work as the person being in charge. And as much as I love them because we've known each other. I would not want to work under them. And it's
Yeah.
watching the way that they were in that position that made them so different. And I was like, yeah. So I actually turned down the job. I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to work under you. I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate it, but
Sure.
I ran from it.
Sure. I'm in a weird situation now where I am very close with my immediate supervisor. She hired me, and we became friends after I started at Goodwin. And so now, you know, we hang out socially. She's been to my house, you know, we know each other's kids. But there's still always in the back of my head, because she's my supervisor, there's still things where I need to be careful. And for the most part, we work very well together and we collaborate. And, you know, she can, if she needs to call me out on something, for the most part, she does, and she does it with grace. So I'm not too offended by it, but it's still a weird situation. Like, I also know to some extent that I need to, this is going to sound funny, I need to be on my best behavior because this is a friend, and I don't want to put her in that position where, you know, she needs to call me out. But it's a weird situation. It really is. All right. Workplace culture. It's funny to think about this. You know, we all live it, we all experience it, but you don't realize it until we really stop and think about it. But there's a distinct culture of workplace. That culture is going to include storytelling, humor, and jargon. People are cliquey. People are, you know, they've got special languages that they use. They've got special ideas and jokes that they have. It's not unlike like middle school, you know, or a family, except it's a workplace. So as you look at this, you can think about probably in your own work experiences, there are stories that people pass down from year to year. There are private jokes that people share, and there's certainly language that people share with each other. And then as someone new enters that workplace, it's almost like a hazing, or it's almost like an initiation period, but you have to learn those stories. You have to learn that humor. You have to learn how to fit in with that community. So there is a distinct, generally very tightly knit community with work. Workplace incivility is huge. We've talked a little bit about this already. We were sharing our stories. This is kind of a no-brainer. Workers who have been poorly treated, or that it has experienced, affected their experience.
Their work. And if you get frustrated, you some goddamn juice. That's what it's about.
There we go. Kind of a no-brainer. If you've had a bad experience, it's going to affect your experience as an employee. And to that point, if I asked you who is your worst boss ever, you've got at least a few names that you can immediately think of. And I'm seeing some of those nods. They're like, oh yeah, absolutely. I've got my top 3 worst bosses, right? Incivility can take on many forms: inattention, people not paying attention, teasing, or bullying. I've certainly seen bullying happen teacher to student. I've seen bullying happen coworker to coworker, and absolutely with like supervisor to employee. So bullying is a real thing if you haven't experienced it. Reminding subordinates of their place. This is a really harsh one. You know, I'm better than you, I'm above you, I have control over you, that sort of thing. Harassment, whether sexual or religious or just like emotional harassment. Not receiving credit where credit is due. Give me just a second, Arlise, I'll come back to you. You know, someone who takes credit for you. Finger pointing, people blaming other people. Oops, I lost my thing. Overwhelming expectations. Man, it sounds like you might be enjoying this right now a little bit. Where there's so much going on. Side conversations or secret conversations in the background. And then finally, exclusion. People being excluded from the research, being excluded from the group, excluded from the fun, and so forth. I would argue that each of you has seen most of them on this list. You've at least seen half of them. In your working career, you'll probably see all of them at one point or another. Arlise, go ahead.
The one that she's
You're muted. There you
Hear
go.
me? Okay.
Yep.
It was one of the ones that you put reminding the subordinate of their place. The power trip struggle with
Yeah.
people that are in a higher position. That was my comment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not cute. It's not cute. It's not pretty. But it's actually very, very common. It really truly is. Oh, one more. Disregard for people's time needs or families. It's not my immediate supervisor, but I have a supervisor now who has no problem calling people at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So yeah. And if you email this person that early, she will assume that it's okay to call and will call you back instead of emailing back. So I have learned to be very careful. If I need to communicate with this person, I do it between regular business hours because I don't want to take a call at 9 o'clock at night or 6 a.m., stuff like that. All right. Other comments about workplace incivility. Because of it, people have intentionally decreased their effort. This probably is going to sound familiar. 48% of people have intentionally decreased their effort because they're being treated poorly. 47% intentionally decrease their time at work. They don't go in as regularly. 38% intentionally decrease the quality of their work. 80% lost work time worrying about the incident. That's a big one. And that one should be like sending red flags up all over the place. Something happens, people get upset, they lose time, whether at work or at home, worrying about it, processing it, thinking about it. They said this, what do you think they mean? Or this happened, oh my God, how do I react to it? That's sort of, it's almost anxiety producing, right? That sort of reaction. 63% lost work time avoiding the offender. You've probably done that. There was someone that you worked with, you didn't want to be near that person, you wanted to avoid that person like the plague, so you did. Really common. 66% said, hold on, I gotta move everyone's head, that their performance declined. 78% said that their commitment to the organization declined. This is another big one. Something happens at work. It's not handled properly. You don't feel like it's a safe place for you to complain about it. So where you felt good about that position, where you felt good about that company, that organization, suddenly you don't anymore. You lose faith in it.
Those are so true. Like after 8 years at a job, I decided that, yeah, no. And what I did was my work declined. I wasn't as happy-go-lucky when I went in anymore, you know, and like it was seen, and it was just like, yeah, that's so true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, not to mention what we were saying a few minutes ago, the physical impact, you know, not sleeping, being stressed, eating too much, eating too little, so forth. 12% said they left their job because of uncivil treatment. 25% admitted to taking their frustration out on customers. And customers, remember, could be students, it could be clients, it could be patients, but people take their frustration out on other people. This does not include, by the way, percentages of people who take their frustration out on family or loved ones, because you know that there are instances where a work situation is so challenging, so painful, so difficult that it comes home and other people are suddenly, you know, subjected to it as well. So it's scary. I hate that this unit tends to be such a downer, but it truly is, because it's such a huge part of our lives. It really truly is.
But honestly, looking at these statistics, I think everyone in this class, I mean, in their current job periodly, in their current job now, I think would kind of like know when their time is job at it done, you know, when their timing of the job is done. Because if you're experiencing all of these discrepancy within the workplace, then that's not the workplace for you.
Sure.
Like,
but thinking about it also from a sociological point of view, or psychological point of view, I do think a lot of times people find themselves in these horrible, horrible situations, but they choose to stay there because either financial reasons or self-esteem reasons or the job market, and they feel that they have to. And that's another, again, this is a downer. I'm so sorry, this is such a downer, but that's another real part of communication and work and what we experience here in the United States. It's really pretty awful if you think about it, right? Where people can be so miserable and so frustrated, but they feel like they have to stay in one place, or they feel like they don't have options, or they feel like they have to stay there until they find something else, which is challenging. It's tough to do. Yeah. Such a downer. And woohoo, incivility in the workplace is getting worse. Yep. People are getting more and more frustrated with their workplaces. In 1998, 25% of employees reported that they were treated rudely. In 2011, that had climbed to over 50%. Now, a couple things to consider here. Is people's perception of what is incivil in the workplace expanding? For example, you think about like a period show like Mad Men. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Mad Men. It takes place in the 60s, and there's a huge culture of entitled white guys and then all these secretaries. And the way they treat each other is so nauseating for someone of our generation, right? But that was what was normal. It was normal to slap a secretary's butt, or to, to sexually harass her, or to be really too forward. And this is something that, it was accepted as just part of the job before, whereas now it might be construed as sexual harassment. So is our perception of what is incivility and what is rude in a workplace expanding? Or is it also the case that people feel more comfortable complaining about things now because they know that there's more chance of a zero tolerance policy?
I think more comfortable complaining about it.
Yeah. It's weird. That's not something that you can easily chart, unfortunately. But if you think about it, workplaces now, well, let's be honest, I've been at Goodwin now for about 7 years. In that time, I have done diversity training. I've done sexual harassment training. I have done religious training. Then we did more, I wouldn't call this diversity training because it was focused more on white privilege training, right? So we've done all of these different trainings in 7 years. I'm not complaining or saying that they're a bad thing, but I've never had to do all of those trainings at another job, so suddenly that belief or that perception that we need more discussion, more conversation about these things is expanding. It really is. Also,
sometimes everyone fear the if I complain, I'm going to get fired, and not like you said before, needing the job and not complaining. And nowadays you're more comfortable to like, okay, I don't like this. I don't like, I can report it and not fear that you're going to lose your job, your position, or whatever it may be.
But it's stressful too. I feel like there's a little bit more stress there too, as well, because there is a concern I will lose my job, or there is a concern that someone will be sued, right? It tends to be more prevalent. So yeah, workplace communication. And of course, I think you're aware of this. Incivility is contagious. If one person's mad, the next person's mad, and it trickles down. It's toxic, and it just kind of floods the whole environment there. All right. Rudeness is contagious. These are some of the rude behaviors most often seen in bosses. See if these sound familiar to you. Interrupts people, judgmental, pays little attention to other people's opinions, leaves the worst tasks for other people. So when they delegate, they give other people the worst jobs. Oh, Amanda. Fails to pass along information, neglects saying please or thank you. It's just demanded, and talks down to people. That's what bosses do. Oh, takes too much credit for things and swears. That's actually considered like a bad rude behavior now. And puts other people down. Rude behaviors people admit to seeing in themselves. Hibernating, focusing more on their phones or their computers and not interacting with other people. Using jargon or special language to exclude other people. Ignoring invitations. Being judgmental. We do this. We do this, you know we do. Leaving more difficult tasks for others. I was in a meeting earlier this week where I was trying to help someone else delegate and no one wanted to volunteer, and it was really painful. Doesn't listen, doesn't pay attention, emails or texts during meetings all the time, all the time. Takes other people's contributions for granted, belittles other people, like making faces and gestures, and then of course neglecting to say please and thank you. And these are things we do. And I don't want to call people out. You probably recognize a few things on that list that you've done yourselves.
I'm gonna call myself out. I make the faces. I make the faces. I do, and that's one of the things that I realized. Yeah, Regina, you may not think that these people are seeing the expression.
Oh
but
yeah.
they do see it. So yeah, I do. I make the faces. Yeah, I do.
Well, that is where Zoom is a beautiful thing, right? That's where Zoom is a beautiful thing, and you can just, there you go, turn yourself off. Let me turn it back on. There we go. And I'm constantly emailing and texting. The worst part is I was in a meeting this afternoon. I'm texting one person who's also in the meeting at the same time, but then another person starts chatting with me. So I've got two different, private conversations going on in this one meeting with like 10 people in it. It's bad. We do it. Rudeness is expensive. And we've danced around this, but let's really look at it critically. When we experience rudeness, we respond with rudeness. It's just the way it is. It's a defense mechanism. Someone's rude to you, you tend to be rude back, right? We are less creative. Our performance deteriorates. Our focus deteriorates. When we see rudeness in another place, we're less likely to do business with a company. So there is a financial implication. And then this is a really huge one. When stuff happens, when things go wrong and people are rude to each other or they don't handle a situation well, it does cost money to a company. There's lost time, there's lost wages, there's lost productivity. I have to be honest, at least once a semester, I have to deal with an angry student, at least once a semester. Now realize I supervise 4 other people right now, and they teach classes for me, communications classes for me. And it happens every semester that there's an angry student. Whether that student's anger is valid or whether the professor's anger is valid is irrelevant, but the amount of time that it takes to email people, to have a mediation with them, to sit down and investigate what happened on the student side and what happened on the professor's side is huge. It can take me a full day to iron out a problem like that. And a lot of times it's just a misunderstanding. Someone said something, it wasn't understood correctly, and that's the basis of the fight. And again, I would imagine in your jobs, you've seen similar situations. And we said the last thing here, people are less healthy because we're stressed out, because workplace incivility is so challenging, because workplace communication is so challenging. People tend to be less healthy, which in turn affects our insurance premiums. So be nice to each other and your insurance will go down. That's the moral of the story. All right. At this point, the last few slides I have to do with toxic employees. And I'm not going to go into them right now because I feel like we've talked about them a lot already with the different examples we have. I will post this PowerPoint so you can see them. You see on the left side of the screen here, hot mess, slacker, martyr, socialite, and sociopath. But we've shared a lot already with this tonight. So I don't feel the need to discuss these even more, especially if it's going to trigger us and make us feel so so upset about it. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And any final thoughts about workplace communication?
So I've had this experience the past